Plan Advisory Committee. This is our second meeting, and this will be a joint meeting between, along with City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Mr. Mayor?
The time is now 5:30. City Council joint session with Planning and Zoning is also now in session.
Thank you, sir. First item on the agenda is presentation, service recognition for our retiring Vice Chairman, Ernest Evans, Jr.
Okay, good evening, Mayor, Council, Chairman, Planning and Zoning Commissioners. Tonight we have the pleasure of recognizing Mr. Ernest Evans as a Planning and Zoning Commissioner from 1993 to today. So, not to show how young or old I am, Mr. Evans has been a commissioner as long as I have been alive, which is incredible to me. And me and Mr. Evans have had jokes about this over the years. He has been a wealth of knowledge and has really shown the Planning and Zoning Commissioners, the new commissioners, the ropes, and has just been a staple part of the Planning and Zoning Commission for all of these years. And the City of Schertz, definitely Mr. Evans, recognizes you and thanks you for all of the many years of service. We have a little clock plaque here for you. So it says, it's presented to Ernest Evans, Jr. in appreciation for your dedicated service to the City of Schertz Planning and Zoning Commission. And then, thank you so much, Mr. Evans. Like I said, and I think Chairman Outlaw would like to say a few words as well.
Yeah, he's not getting off that easy. Emily said a lot. I got on the Planning and Zoning Commission in the end of 2016, and Ernie's kind of been he's been the rock, if you will, up there. A lot of commissioners have come and gone, and Ernie is there to provide us with guidance and advice. Sometimes he would take a little different, bring a little different viewpoint to the discussion. And I don't know if I can make 33 years, but we may give it a try. But again, Ernie, we're you know, I'm sure I speak for the entire commission. We're going to miss you, and we're going to miss your inputs and your comments, and we wish you well in the future, and good wishes for your medical care. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Mr. Evans, on behalf of the City Council, thank you so much for all the work that you have put in. You shaped this city into what it is now, the neighborhoods, the manufacturing that's here. We're so grateful for everything that you have done, and you always, when you look at the city, remember you were a big part of it. Thank you so much, sir.
Get some of these maps. Okay, get all these. What's the purpose of this one? Sure. I haven't seen that one until just now. Because this has got the city border. This has got a ETJ area.
Thanks again, Ernie. I can't tell you, you're going to be missed. Next item on the agenda is hearing of residents. This time is set aside for any person who wishes to address the subcommittee. Each person should fill out the speaker's register prior to the meeting. Presentation should be limited to no more than 3 minutes. All remarks shall be addressed to the subcommittee as a body and not to any individual member thereof. Any person making personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks while addressing the subcommittee may be requested to leave the meeting. David Scagliola. Okay.
This is from Dr. David Scagliola. He asked me to read this. Apologies for not being at the meeting. Please express my sincere appreciation to the members of the Commission for their dedicated service to our city, as their actions, insights, and decisions will, figuratively and literally, lay the foundation of our future. My primary concern is, I believe our UDC should be more binding as a code and not simply a suggestion, to be modified at the discretion or for the convenience of developers. I understand the purpose of a PDD is to provide some flexibility for planned developments, but not to redefine our zoning standards across the board. Goes too far. Please remember the UDC has served us well for many years, even if most of us have not been around that long to remember why some sections are written the way they are. Specifically, I do not have a problem with modifying the dimensions of a few units to fit into the confines of an oddly shaped lot, but such deviations should be the exception, not the rule. For example, our UDC states an R3 is 9,000 square feet with a depth of 120 feet. A certain developer wants to redefine the dimensions to 5,700 square feet, 36% smaller, and 87 feet, 27% smaller, across the entire development. I understand some council members take exception to my use of hyperbole, exaggeration, so I won't say I find that egregious and just shy of bending over backwards to let's be PC and simply say accommodate the proposer. No, I will not say that, mostly because PC annoys me. Seriously, I could accept them to add more than the 25%-ish units is considerably more than a tweak. Bottom line, we need to define and adhere to our codes and standards. Otherwise, others with a vested interest in maximizing the best use of their property to maximize profit, even if it's at the expense of our city or communities, will propose what is in their best interest. So the simple question is, who should be in charge? One thought, I'm going to end with a rhetorical question because I believe most of you agree, and I fully support you when you do, though we were put into our positions to manage, lead, and create a better tomorrow. Let's hear it for Schertz, AKA that shining city on the hill. Sincerely, gone but not forgotten, and he wrote, or perhaps forgotten but not gone, David L. Scagliola.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing. City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing related to the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, CPAC, within this agenda. The public hearing will be open to receive a report from staff, Freese and Nichols, and any other interested persons. Upon completion, the public hearing will be closed. The joint session will discuss and consider the application and may request additional information from staff or the applicant if required. So item number 1 is conduct a public hearing, workshop, and discussion for the Schertz Comprehensive Plan update. Mr. Hawes?
Okay, thank you everyone for being here to our second CPAC meeting. Just a little rundown of how this is gonna go. Shad with the Freese and Nichols team, they are here. They're gonna give us a short presentation, and then after that presentation, we're gonna open it up for a public hearing if any residents here would like to make a comment. And then there'll be some interactive time between Planning and Zoning, City Council, and the Friesen Nichols team. Okay, so without any further ado.
All right, good evening to Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. Glad to be here today. So as Samuel mentioned, my name is Shad Como with Friesen Nichols, Principal and Vice President. Also have with me Caitlin Admire, Caroline Stewart, Chris Westland, and we have our team and partner, Jason Clonch, that you'll hear from in a few seconds from Catalyst Commercial. So as you are aware, we are updating your comprehensive plan. And this comprehensive plan is a little bit different from your last comprehensive plan. We are looking at 4 key focus areas as well as some of the additional recommendations. And so we'll be getting a little input from you from that as well. But we kicked off this process back in March. We did a tour of the city with city staff, got a chance to look at these 4 key areas and some other areas in the city as well. We were here in May, and we had our first comprehensive plan advisory committee meeting with the Planning Commission, and kind of gave a project overview at that time and received some initial input. Since then, we've been working on developing market analysis, some various analysis maps. There is a project website and community survey that is being launched as well. And this afternoon, what we'd like to do is we'd like to talk to you about some preliminary draft future land uses that have been developed for these 4 key areas. And then we'll continue this process. After this meeting today, we'll go back and we'll tweak some things, and we'll coordinate with staff. We'll come back for another comprehensive plan advisory committee. There'll also be a community event as well, where we'll get input from the community. And then we're looking to wrap up the process toward the end of the year or into January. So with that, Jason is going to give us an overview of the market snapshot.
Council, Commission, it's an honor and pleasure being here, and I want to say thanks to staff and all your help today hosting us, and I appreciated the conversation. Obviously, economic development is an important component of the land use strategy. I will say that every comprehensive plan that we've worked on that have had some sort of integration with economic development is a much powerful plan. So we look forward to sharing with you some of the highlights. One of the things that economic development is important is you guys have first-class city services, and we want to find ways to continue to extract value and continue that momentum by creating value, and we want to make sure that this plan is actionable but also creates value. Some of that we're going to be looking at, and we talked about some of these issues today, is how do you continue to attract the right talent? How do you accommodate the right housing to attract the type of talent that you want in order to continue to fuel those industries and the businesses and the services that I think your city desires and relies on. Also, obviously, economic development is important to provide the financial abilities to create and fund the high quality infrastructure and also maintain that. I know that's an important component as you continue to age. And we talked about some of the sewer expansions and some of the infrastructure that you guys have in the work today. And then ultimately, I think creating the standards, and I appreciate the comment earlier, but also creating the right standards and aligning that with the market opportunities. And if the standards are too high, you can sort of prevent some of the growth, but if they're too low, that might be the type of growth that you don't want. And then ultimately, how do you wrap around that? We had a lot of conversation today in terms of quality of life and core values. I think you questioned how does economic development come into play with that, but essentially we want this comprehensive plan to represent you and how unique you are, and make sure that some of the local pride and the Americana gets baked into the plan, and ultimately the built environment can encourage and discourage that as well. And then ultimately we want to make sure that this plan fosters quality and strong neighborhoods. I think the resiliency is important, but also future neighborhoods that they align with where the market is, but also represent your core values and the quality that you desire. So How we do that, we want to know where the market is. We want to make sure that that's aligned with some of the land tracks. So we've been, along with Freeze, have been studying those and then really understanding your community values and vision. So ultimately, we want to make sure that those objectives are calibrated, that it ultimately guides the strategic plan and the land use strategy, and that it integrates some of the real-time owners. And so a lot of what we've been doing is understanding some of the tracks, some of the constraints, what's in play, and then what's under development. And ultimately, our role is to find the nexus and make sure that the plan is balanced and implementable, but also helps drive some of the land use strategies that we've talked with staff. So, obviously, we understand the value of the Air Force Base, the employment, the economic spend. We also talked about some of the challenges and constraints, just because there are some limitations in terms of development of what you can do, certainly at certain ends of the runway. We recognize in terms from an economic standpoint, you have a lot of undeveloped land. So what is the appropriate balance? What's the vision? What's the opportunity? What's the market opportunity for that remaining land? And then obviously you've got frontage along 2 major interstates, which I think is a huge plus. And the good news is the majority of the land along most of your interstates to some degree is somewhat undeveloped. But some of that area has not necessarily been well defined. Some of it lacks infrastructure. And I think this plan is going to be important because this plan in terms of timing over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is going to shape most likely how those corridors develop. And then obviously when you think about market, you don't think about just the population within Schertz. It's a hyper-regional location. When we work sort of in the central Texas market, there's probably not another area in the United States that has this much talent in terms of concentration. If you think about how much higher ed is here, and how much industry here, and how much power and growth, and how much development, and you're right in the middle of all that. So a lot of what we're thinking about today is how do you harness that opportunity and not only take advantage of internal growth, but how can you continue to make this place a destination, not only just for tourists, but also for businesses and future residents that align with who you are and what you want to be. So in terms of demographics, obviously a major factor is what is the velocity of growth, what makes sense historically, what have you accommodated, and then in the future, what makes sense. And so we've been studying population forecast. Obviously, some of this growth could be accommodated through higher density, depending on your development standards. And then some of the growth, you may never reach these numbers based on just available land, infrastructure, some of the floodplain that you deal with, and maybe some of the development desires and regulations that we come up with the ultimate plan. But assuming that you kept going at a reasonable velocity and rate and an annual growth rate at a very conservative, let's say 1.8%, which is kind of your trailing compound annual growth rate, you could reach ultimately about 100,000 people over the next 40 years. So that's a big number when you think today you're sitting at about 43, 44, 45,000. So, and you think about if there's roughly 3 people per household, that's a lot of people essentially that you would accommodate. And that Schertz tomorrow looks a lot different than Schertz today. And so part of the thinking is how would you accommodate? What does the development type look like? And what is the development pattern to accommodate sort of that future growth? One of the things that we also did is we looked at various factors across Schertz and the region. We looked at a lot of your peer cities, and what we do know is that there's strong growth pressure. And I love working in places that there's strong growth pressure because you have choices and options. When you're working in places that have negative population growth, maybe you've got migration to other places, that's a whole different situation where essentially you could probably absorb about as much high-density residential and subdivisions as you can deliver. The question is, how can you deliver them? How do you prioritize infrastructure? And what do they need to look like? And so that's a much better sort of question. And then what we did notice here that's different to some degree, even in consistent with state and national averages, that there's a high ownership rate. And I think this is a place that caters to, we talked about it earlier, families and places with children and places that appreciate the school district here. And so we did notice that there's sort of an elevated amount of home ownership. There's nothing wrong with that. I would say that when we see places that have a majority rental, that sort of changes the composition of the community. But also through that, it also gives you sort of a sense of neighborhood pride because of the ownership. And I think that's certainly evident based on what we've learned and what we've heard. In addition, you have a high amount of disposable income. So not only do you have population growth, but you have high median income. And of that income, you've got a lot of disposable income. So there's a sense of additional income that could be spent on goods and services. However, we did look at leakage and some of the cell phone data and some of that. We do know that you travel outside of the city to shop and entertain, and so one of our goals is how can we look at the development patterns and maybe create some opportunities to create more destination and mixed use and keep some of those dollars locally, which could also create value for employment and also existing residences. And then they also, I mean, obviously that the purchasing power could be spent locally, again, depending on how you dial it in. One of the things that we looked at is also just some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. How can you leverage your position within the regional economy to continue to attract the types of jobs, knowing that the talent is here or accessible? How can we continue to work on educational programs, reinforce our talent pool to essentially remain competitive? Again, how can we continue to look at housing options that can be true to your values and can not displace essentially that sense of pride in the community, but create maybe a little bit more missing middle or hybrid products or a little bit more diversification to accommodate a wider range. Maybe that's some senior product. Or maybe a mixed-use center with a little bit of urban residential tucked in it. And then again, in terms of infrastructure, how can we continue to look at infrastructure and build that in a way? If you think about streets and roads and trails, all of those things define the built environment. So we did recognize some opportunities to continue to think about what does a transportation infrastructure look like and how can that be integrated and to really help coordinate some of the development patterns. So again, just some highlights in terms of some of the things that we were thinking about from a market standpoint. One of the things that we did is looked at, okay, we know population's growing, but what is the propensity for that population? What types of product can we support? And again, I think on a conservative basis, we looked at retail, residential, multifamily, industrial, just to kind of identify what is the capacity. And based on historical growth, purchasing power, looking at kind of the preferences and propensity for rent, we think the market can easily absorb about 74 units of market rate rental a year. So thinking about programming that's probably maybe one phase of a multifamily project every 1 or 2 years. We also looked at single family demand, again, very conservatively. This is market rate. We'll look at the full spectrum here. But looking at the market rate, there's about 108 units of demand just for the market rate housing that could easily be absorbed from a planning perspective. A lot of the demand is for obviously homes above 350, and there's some executive and luxury homes that aren't being serviced that certainly could. And then earlier today, we talked about some of the gaps in some of the deliveries. You just can't build a house under 250 these days. It just doesn't work functionally between inflation, cost of market goods, and real estate costs, but we do know that there is an underserved market there in terms of workforce housing and some of the commutes. So ultimately, we looked at all these opportunities. Across the board, there's probably demand for about 513 units of single family across all price range, around 370 units, again, across all price range of multifamily, about 10,500 square feet of office on a very conservative basis. Office is sort of going through the transition. Post-COVID, people are sort of rethinking about how they work. And then we have slightly rising unemployment, although Texas is more resilient than other places. You don't have those big corporate decisions as much. So office is going to be anemic for the next probably 3 to 4 years until it fully recovers. There's still a substantial demand for retail. There's about 200,000 square feet of retail demand that's unmet today. And then there's that compounding effect as you continue to grow in terms of population, that number will continue to increase on an annual basis. And again, in terms of industrial, I think easily, in a very conservative basis, you could absorb at least 200,000 square feet of industrial a year. Again, that's conservative. The question is, and we looked at that today, and we'll talk about that in terms of land use, where is the appropriate place to put it? And other than your interstate and some of the regulations that you have, I think finding places for this in a place that makes sense is probably going to be some of our biggest challenge. And again, these are annual numbers, so if you start thinking about what is the capacity in that 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 horizon, that number gets pretty big across really all of these categories. So some of the things that we've been thinking about is how can we continue to think about corporate attraction, but even think about some of those emerging segments, the advanced manufacturing or some of the tech or flex tech are jobs that may not require as much labor, but have a lot higher pay scale instead of just attracting labor that may be more distribution, logistics, or transportation, which certainly makes sense in a market like this, but again, how can we continue to increase the pay scale and create higher value jobs? One of the things that we've been thinking about is you have a lot of retail base. There's still a lot of leakage, but where are some opportunities to integrate some placemaking and experiential retail and continue to build upon some of the entertainment uses that have already landed here in a way that makes sense and optimizes some of the remaining frontage that you have, so it's not all just strip pad and incremental. Again, you have amazing neighborhoods. How can we expand that without sort of infringing on your core values? We heard a little bit of that today, sort of some of the threats, but we think some of the healthiest neighborhoods and the most resilient neighborhoods are those that have a balanced palette. And you know, all of one product's not necessarily healthy no matter what type of income it attracts. We want to continue to work with EDC and build programs to invest in that local talent. That's probably one of the smartest things you can do to attract those higher paying jobs. And then we want to continue to explore ways to leverage the development projects and really look at how you deploy your infrastructure. We know you got to continue to build roads and sewer, but how can we do that in a way that also can catalyze new jobs and new industries? And so for us, that would be a trifecta. And then ultimately, we want to make sure that we're aligning all the development outcomes, all the stuff that we do, to your broader goals. What is it that you want to achieve? What's missing here? What's important to achieve in the next 20, 30 years? And making sure that the economic strategy really reinforces the land use strategy and that those work together in really a symbiotic way. Really, you know, in a way as planning and zoning works with the commission. I think we would see economic development working in tandem. So with that, I think we're going to, I'll turn it back to Shad, but I think we're going to maybe open it up to public comment and then close it so we can continue to engage in this conversation. And I'm going to stay around, so I'll be more than happy to answer any specific questions in terms of market and some of our thoughts and even some of our conversations today. So.
Okay, I'm going to go over overview of the 4 planning areas. Before we do that, so one of the things that we do before going through any planning process is that we want to recognize previous studies and plans that have been done by the city. Of course, time and effort have been placed into those, and so we don't want to just push those to the side. And so we always look at those previous plans and studies to see if there's still some relevant information and recommendations in there. And so these are a list of some of the plans that we have been reviewing in the background. So here are the 4 key areas that this process is focusing on, and I'll go through those here. So the first area is you have South, I-10 to the south, Hackerville Road is here. You have 1518 as well. The majority of this area is, and this is the future land use designations that we're looking at. And those future land use designations, as you know, were developed in a previous plan, and they look typically anywhere from 10 to 15, and even in some cases 20 years out in that particular moment of what you all envision those land uses to be in the future. And so now we're looking today to update those that are relevant. And so in Area 1, you have, for the most part, agricultural designation here, conservation area, mainly vacant in this area. So this is an area, a key area, because it has a lot of potential for development. Currently, there's some single family here. You'll see also some estate designations here as well. And the future land use plan from the previous comprehensive plan also recognized some commercial, campus commercial and highway retail as well. Area 2, just south of Randolph, you'll notice also some ag conservation. You'll have those compatibility areas as well. Some estate residential and a little bit of commercial highway retail as well. 3A and 3B have been broken out. So 3A is mainly the quarry area. There's also some estate residential in this area as well. And then 3B, and then as you know, 3A is outside of your city limits, so it's in your ETJ. 3B, you have a portion of it in your ETJ, currently designated as ag conservation. and a little bit of single family. And then area 4 along 35 corridor. A lot of this area also has a lot of potential as well because of the vacant land in this area. You have a little bit of institutions, some public schools located here, ag conservation, and then you have your highway commercial, campus commercial, and a little bit of industrial. So what we're gonna do when we go into the next portion is we're going to talk about these areas, and we'll get some input from you all. And so what we did is we took a stab, and we didn't want to go too far into it because we really want to get your input and feel for these, but we developed 2 scenarios for these 4 areas in terms of what those future land uses might look like. And so we'll get into that right after the public hearing.
Turn the microphone back on. So a little bit different than normally the way we run a public hearing, but we'll be flexible. We'll figure it out. So at this time, it is 6:01 p.m., and I will open the forum up for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the group on this topic is invited to step forward, use the microphone, give us your input. Okay. Now, I'm assuming that what we will probably have to do is I will do this again after we go through the scenarios. Does that sound all right, Mr. Mayor? Okay. Well, it's up to you. Okay. All right. Well, let me check now. So, commissioners, we just hold the discussion for after the scenario and council? Okay.
The scenario will be back and forth, correct?
So is that your intent? You want it to be an interactive?
Yes, so what we'll do is we'll present each scenario. We'll talk about the differences between the two. And then we can open it up for public hearing, and then we can come back to you all for input. Sound okay?
Are you going to do it by scenario, or are you going to do both scenarios and then we talk?
We'll do both.
Okay.
And then we'll talk. And then in addition to that, you have some resource maps on your table that has some floodplain information, major thoroughfare plan, and then you also have the 2 scenarios as well. So as we're going through them, if you want to make any comments on those, so you don't forget anything, or if you have any questions, you can use the maps that you have in front of you.
Okay.
Well, before you get started, I do have, I think it would be easier to understand if we go through one scenario and pick a section of it and compare it to the other scenario, then try to do the whole map all at once and then do the other map at once. If we focus on scenario number 2 and, number 1 and 2 and just look at that block,
Okay.
I think it would be easier for all of us to understand and to do the whole map all at once.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good. All right. There it is. Okay, so first we'll talk about area number 1. So in scenario number 1, you'll notice that before I start, so here are your future land use categories here. One of the things that we're discussing internally is modifying these and simplifying really these future land use categories. There are a ton of them now, and this is from the previous comprehensive plan, but we're thinking it might be easier because again, the future land use plan is more of a guide for you all, and so we're talking about simplifying those. But for today's discussion, you'll notice that there's some single-family residential. You have mixed-use neighborhood. So mixed-use neighborhood can also include some neighborhood commercial retail as well. You'll notice that the green areas represent open space or parks. And then along I-10, you have highway commercial. So for the majority of area number 1 is mixed-use neighborhood. of single-family residential, and then you have the highway commercial that's along I-10. Scenario number 2, the biggest difference is, and you'll notice that there are some nodes here. We recognize that there are some future roadways that'll be going through this area, so there are some commercial nodes, kind of small neighborhood type commercial retail. Along I-10, the biggest difference between these two scenarios is right here along I-10. So we still have the neighborhood commercial area, but you'll notice that there's some designation or some area that allows for multifamily as well. So a little bit of higher density. That multifamily also serves as a buffer between your single family and your mixed use neighborhood. Although this is outside of the area, we do show that kind of gaps or bridges the gap between area number 1 and 2, highway commercial, campus commercial, and some commercial light industrial. All right. Area number 2, scenario 1. Again, this is south of Randolph. So you have some commercial light industrial here. You have a little bit of the air insulation compatible land uses there. And then for the most part, this area kind of retains from the previous comp plan. You have single family residential, have your innovation, industry, technology, R&D, and then mixed use neighborhood. Differences in scenario number 2 is this remains ag conservation area, so again, a lower density. And this part remains the same. And then we also kind of went outside the lines, if you will, colored outside the lines. You have your mixed use neighborhood and some highway commercial. All right, back to scenario 1. We're looking at 3A. So 3A, again, is a majority quarry area now, and so this remains as ag conservation for, foreseeable future, and then you have some estate residential here. 3B, your ETJ area that's outside of the city limits. You have a little bit of campus commercial. This represents open space or park area. You have the single family residential and then estate. Scenario number 2, the quarry area looks more towards an opportunity for redevelopment in the future. So say, for example, the quarry goes away at some point in time. This area looks at a mixed use neighborhood and some open space, and then you still have your estate residential. 3B, the only difference here is in 1, you had the estate residential, and this is a higher density at mixed use neighborhood. Final area number 4, scenario 1. All right, so this is the area. We have a lot going on here. So we have some highway commercial along here. You have some mixed use neighborhood, single family neighborhood, industrial area, a little bit of a mixed use neighborhood here. Area 2, we still have some highway commercial along here. You still have some single family in here near the schools. Very nice schools, by the way, in that area. And then mixed use neighborhood, light industrial. The biggest difference in 1 and 2 is this allows for some multifamily kind of designated in this area here. I believe there's also a buffer of some open space here between the neighborhood area or the residential areas and the light industrial areas. That was a lot of back and forth. So again, when we go into more of a discussion, we can talk about those a little bit.
Nope, turn it off. All right, so let's start with the public, okay? If anyone would like to address it, Mr. Hawes has a microphone. Please, if you would give us your name and address for the record, and then 3 minutes.
My name is Richard Eads. It's 5523 Cypress Point. That's area 3A, 4, and 3B. Talked about before, we're out there in the middle of nowhere. The city has a hard time getting out there most of the time. And it looks like you're going to be putting apartments and condos and stuff like that out there, apparently, between our housing complexes. Right now, I think the buffer is not being addressed between these areas. So that's going to be a concern for my neighborhood, which is in between both of those. We have almost 300 homes. We got the parklands on the other side, which is not mine, but there's residentials there. And it looks like you're going to be putting high-capacity apartments on one side, commercial all the way down 35 in Frontage Road, and then another high-capacity on the other side of 35. So that's our concern. And also, listening to your plan, it sounds like I haven't heard much about the existing residents and fixed income residents. It's always nice to have $400,000 homes come in, but what are you going to do about the people who work at Randolph and the people who are fixed income that are already here, except price them out? To me, I see this as a plan of another Austin. Everything's going to be so high, except you're going to have certain people that work in industry and can afford $400,000 home. It's going to change the church in general. That's my view on it right now.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else? Don't be shy. All right, come on up, Dr. Penshorn.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council, Commissioners. Many of you know me. I'm Mark Penshorn. I live at 8320 Trainer Hill Road, which is in Area 1. And as I said before, many of you know me. I've spoken to this group numerous times, and I'll say pretty much the same thing I've said before. Area 1 is uniquely different in its rain runoff issues from the rest of Schertz. That's a subject right now that is kind of remote since it hasn't rained in a long time. But my encouragement to all of you is to really evaluate how that area is going to be dealt with. I've lived through numerous floods, and when it rains again, and it will, and it'll rain too much again, we need to have the infrastructure designed to handle it, or there'll be a lot of people with wet floors. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? No? How does the mayor go? He goes going once? All right. Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to turn it over to you and the city council at this point.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Council, floor is open for discussion. Councilmember Dalla.
I guess first question, scenario 1 or scenario 2, does one of those reflect the current comp plan?
No, this is a different, difference from the current comp
Okay.
plan. Yeah. So for example, in area 1, you'll notice in the current comprehensive plan, it's a lot of ag conservation in that area.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, that kind of leads toward the comment that I was going to make. Area 1, you know, in any of the land basically, I guess, east of Weir Road, between Weir Road and Cibolo Creek. There's a lot of floodplain there. There's a lot of land there that is not in designated floodplain, but has flooded in the past. And I've spoken for years, even back to my time on P&Z, 4 years ago now, that area east of Weir Road probably needs to stay ag conservation, just to limit what could happen there in the future. Definitely don't want to see a lot of development there, and as Dr. Pinchon said, people getting their feet wet, but to me it's also about, in the event of that catastrophic flood event, that we're also having to send our first responders into the water to get people out, and that's just not acceptable. The extension of the highway commercial all the way across the bottom of Zone 1, I think is appropriate and fitting. I like that idea of it. Other than that, there really doesn't seem to be a whole lot of change on Area 1. For Area 2, I like the idea of having the commercial light industrial between the landing zones there. I think that would be a good use for that land, and give some opportunities for that type of use in the southern part of Schertz that we really don't have. For 3A and 3B, honestly, I wouldn't mind us looking at the idea of releasing 3B, and even 3A might be part of a discussion, but that would be something that we would have to discuss with the landowners out there and see what they want to do, and make that a joint discussion. In Area 4, it's pretty scatterbrained, and a lot of that is with different uses because of what's currently out there. I'd kind of like to see maybe try to develop a more coordinated, more of a, I guess even a town center type concept. I think that we have the spacing between San Antonio and New Braunfels and the population base to where we could look at creating something like that in the future. Those are my comments.
Council, any comments? Mayor Pro Tem Brown?
Yeah, again, I realize this is kind of early in the process, and I don't have I've got the interactive map pulled up now to try to make a little bit of comparison. It's pretty difficult. I pretty much agree with Councilman Dolly in there. One is going to be one of the harder ones to figure out for the long term, and I'd hate to sit here tonight and make okay, I think this is the right vision without a little bit more time to do some comparison in there. Again, anything on the other side of 35, the whole concept of that for many years has been to be low impact or low density residential and allow for more industrial, et cetera, as well as the ag portion that's already out there. We have a lot of small, 3 to 5 acre and 10 acre owners out there that, again, they're kind of rural. They like it like that. And I don't see any reason why we can't keep that kind of thing going out there, because with the quarry and everything else, if we start putting in residential neighborhoods, all you're going to get is pushback, and then they're going to want to close the quarry, and so why even go into that argument? I would say stay away from that up in that area, and stick with either estate, ag, industrial usage, and not even put any multifamily or residential in there at all. And again, 4, it's a mixed bag, always has been. I don't see an easy way to harmonize that, homogenize that, whatever you want to call it. and get that a little bit more coordinated on there. But got to start someplace, so I would stick with that.
One thing to keep in mind too, in terms of comp planning 101, the comprehensive plan isn't a legally binding document, as you all know, and so we encourage you all to really reevaluate on an annual basis, the comprehensive plan as a whole, but in particular the future land use plan. So as you see things that might be changing, development or redevelopment, you have that opportunity to tweak those. Comments?
Oh, Chad, you mentioned evaluate on a yearly basis, but actually planning and zoning gets evaluated every month just about when zoning issues are brought up to their attention. There's a mixture of a combination of scenario 1 and 2. I agree with Councilmember Dalla on section number 1 is the industrial moving all the way on IH-35, on IH-10. I think it's a valuable asset for anyone that wants to do some light industrial there. If we look at number 2, and that's why I think is that developers are going to develop. And I think on scenario number 2, you have green space there. No developer is going to do green space. That's what the commission is going to be tasked to do, is to change it from scenario number 2, green space, to probably light industrial. It's mainly because we're looking at low density there. So, so number 2 on scenario number 2 seems more fitting. If we look at scenario number 2, I think 3A and 3B have a better combination as to what we would like to see there also. Again, once the quarry's gone, we have it all as agricultural, and I just don't see that happening. Like I said, when they sell it, it's not going to be a park. I don't think anybody will consider putting that much park space there. And
so let me correct that. These colors look a little different than it did on. So this, I did say it was park area, so open space. So this is the industry technology R&D designation there.
the green,
Yeah, and 3A on certain area too.
it's, oh, it almost looks the same.
But
yeah.
that was my mistake.
Okay, so we need new colors. Okay.
And another reason why we talked about simplifying these future land use categories, which I think will also help with, I know it was a comment made about, I think it was kind of related to some variety of residential. And so in the new categories, we'd like to also include something that's more related to like medium density, which would be, townhome or smaller, little smaller than your multifamily density, but a little bit more than your single family.
Okay, so scenario number 2, on section number 2, is that light industrial or is it agricultural then?
Which area is that? 3A? Are you referring to?
No, number 2.
Oh, area 2. Yeah, so that's the industry, technology, and R&D under the current future land use designations. So everything along I-10 is either highway commercial, you have some light industrial, and then kind of R&D technology, which can also be like a warehouse type as well.
Okay, so they're both industrial on section 2.
Yeah. So
It's just a different classification of industrial. Okay. And I think on scenario number 1, item number 4, I think we extend the commercial all the way to the end of our city limits there, and that's why I like scenario number 1 on 4.
Okay, yeah, the highway commercial.
Yes. Yeah, it goes, yeah, the highway stops here. It stops short and it doesn't go all the way through on scenario number 2. It does on scenario number 1. Well, either I'm colorblind or we need new colors on this, because some of these colors are very difficult to distinguish whether or not they're industrial or park space. I can see the dark ones being park space, but on some of them it's,
That's why we discussed
Yeah.
simplifying these.
okay. All right. Council, any other comments? All right, I'll turn it over back to Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioners, comments, questions?
It's hard to tell what this is.
I'll start off. I remain, as long as I've been on planning and zoning, concerned about the area surrounding Randolph. And I know that we're going to, the accident zone and APZ1 is pretty much going to be sterile, but I would like more input and to hear from the folks at Randolph to see how much they would accept. I haven't heard much of anything since I've been on P&Z from Randolph, and I don't want to see Randolph threatened by our development. And the only thing left to protect, I think, is the southern the southern APZ2 on the east runway. Everything else is pretty much developed, and we can't get that back. So as long as the land is empty on the southern end of the eastern runway, I'd like to see how much we can protect that if we have to. And I'd like to hear more from Randolph. We have a new airplane coming in. It should have been here already, but it's going to be delayed again, I think, for 2 more years. So the airplane's going to be a lot more capable, a lot faster, a lot louder. And, you know, I don't know how much different it's going to be from the T-38, but I would like more input from them to see what we need to do and how much they'll accept on the southern end of the base and the approach and departure of the east runway. As far as development on the interstates, I think we need as much commercial retail as we can get. Schertz has depended a lot in the past on rooftops for tax revenue and revenue to run the city. We need a lot more retail and a lot more commercial to expand the tax base, much like Comal has done, Comal County, and other areas of Guadalupe County. They got a lot of commercial. They get a lot of tax revenue from the commercial, and I think we need to grab as much of that as we can.
So we've had a conversation. So one thing I failed to mention, we did have some focus groups over the last couple of weeks. We met with some HOA representatives. We met with Randolph. We met with the business and industry kind of commercial group. We met with city staff today, the various departments. There was one other group we met with that I forgot. But we had a conversation with Randolph. They shared with us some of their studies, land use studies, and we did tell them that we're going to circle back with them. And they appreciated the city and us reaching out to them to get their input. And we're going to circle back with them when we do have the draft future land uses, make sure that they are fine with what we're recommending.
Anyone else? I'll say there are no surprises here to me. This is kind of what I expected to see, particularly in southern Schertz. I noticed the estate neighborhood is gone. Everywhere it was is now single family, which is what the developers want out there. Mixed-use neighborhoods, I'm not a big fan of. I understand, I can read the definition, but everything that's come to planning and zoning with mixed-use neighborhood has been single-family residential. Nobody wants to do the mix. And it looks like mixed-use neighborhood is appropriate in a lot of the places where you show it, but the problem is that's not what the developers are doing. They're coming to us and they're saying, well, mixed use includes single-family. Well, yeah, but where's the rest of it? You know, and I think part of the problem is the tracks are too small. You know, nobody has a whole area out there where they can put neighborhood services and maybe office residential complexes. They're just picking up, you know, 100, 200 acres, and all they want to do is build houses. So part of my question, or part of what I would like to see is of course, single family doesn't mean, you know, we have several zoning classifications for single family. And the big concerns we're hearing as these projects come to planning and zoning, the big concerns from the folks that live out there are the increased traffic. So I guess that would fall then to P&Z and to City Council to control the density, you know, even because there's dense single family and there's large lot. So, and I agree about Randolph Air Force Base. I think looking at scenario one, and that's commercial light industrial that I think you have between the two APZs there. Am I reading that correct? And I think that's the appropriate thing to put there. You know, a lot of landowners out there, and the city's been struggling with that area, what to do in that area for quite some time in terms of density. And, you know, I don't think single-family residential is appropriate out there just because of the noise and that. But we can work with Randolph on that. I think Councilmember Brown brought it up. You know, I've been in Schertz a long time now, and part of what we've got, the way we've developed, is the industrial has stayed north of IH-35. And it's worked very well with 35 being the separator between the heavy commercial industrial and the residential. And I don't know, I do remember asking economic development some time back about whether we needed to preserve any more what we have zoned M1, M2, or the industrial space, whether, you know, because we've got that whole stretch that runs up there north of, you know, between 35 and our city, right up against our city limits. Do we need to keep that for industrial, or have we got a sufficient amount? So, you know, your scenario one may be right on there if we don't need to preserve any of that. I guess looking at it, scenario two looks even better. But again, one of the things P&Z has had to address here is multifamily. You know, we've currently got one project that was approved out on 1518. We had another one come in that we weren't real happy with where they wanted to put it. So as your market analysis showed, there's a demand out there for those. My wife and I drove over to, we were over in the Stone Oak area yesterday for a medical appointment, and coming back, as you come past, what is that? I'm never going to remember, but it's a Evans Road. Is it Evans? Anyway, it's a major intersection. And from there, almost all the way to Judson, is nothing but apartments under construction in San Antonio. I mean, they're huge. They look like they're 4 stories. Yeah, and so you know the demand is out there, and I think part of what I wish we could do as a city is get ahead of that and designate certain areas of the city for multifamily. And sorry, way too many colors on this thing, but I know that's all, you've only got so many to choose from. So I think he took a stab at that as to where multifamily would be appropriate. And I think down along IH-10, now only the northern side of that is in Schertz. The rest of it's in San Antonio. So, but I kind of like the scenarios here where, yeah, we kind of mirror 35 down there where the frontage stays commercial, light industrial, and then maybe some industrial behind that as a buffer. So as far as IH-10 goes, I think your scenarios look pretty good. So, anyone else, commissioners?
A quick question for
Sure,
you.
go ahead.
You mentioned the multifamily. Are there some other areas that you'd like to see it? So one thing about multifamily that we have to realize is that we're living in a new time and age where everybody doesn't want to buy a single family home. You might have a six-figure income, might not be interested in buying a single family home. So people are taking the option of renting or buying smaller. And so I think one thing that communities, as we move into the future, and this is communities across the board, is that we have to kind of reevaluate our perception of multifamily and things of that nature. Especially if we want to provide, one of the things we heard earlier is that there's a lot of, if you want to raise a family, this is a great place, but there's also, a variety of residential housing types that are on the market these days that are attractive to people across the board.
Yeah, the kind of the way I see the multifamily is we have all this empty land out there that we should be planning how we want to use it, and it's being gobbled up by single family. And once you put in a subdivision, nobody wants an apartment complex next door. So that's why I say it'd be nice if we could get out in front of it and carve out some space for multifamily so that as the development comes along in the future, we can say, well, that's the plan. And if you've been to any of the, both the council and the commission meetings where we talk about apartment complexes, people get pretty not in my backyard about it. And yeah, it can get pretty heated. So just something for you to think about as you move forward with the plan. Commissioners, anybody else? No? All right.
Commissioner Outlaw, if I may. I'd like to go ahead and point out that Commissioner Outlaw is correct. I mean, we are tasked with, multifamily. You are community planners. That's what this is. This is a plan for our community. But if we're seeing multifamily come in, we like your input as to where it would be a good place. Because we are tasked to do that on a regular basis. A multifamily is coming in at a rate that we have never seen before. We're seeing it pop out on 1604. And we like to know what your plan is for our city so that we don't have to second guess ourselves. It's laid out, this is where it should be. Therefore, when it comes to planning and zoning, it makes the commissioner's task a lot easier at that point. And it would help if we can look at the entire map here in Schertz and find out this would be a place or this would be a place. I think that will help tremendously.
And again, a lot of the problem is the roadway infrastructure. And that's the big problem in southern Schertz right now. Everything is on 1518, and the more we put out there, the worse it gets. Commissioner Hector, do you have something?
Thanks. I was just going to say that, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And just to make it I think, easier for the residents to even understand what the vision is for the city and their growth. Identifying, like the mayor said, and Mr. Outlaw, areas where, you know, multifamily could be placed, even around kind of a town center concept. You know, as you go up and down the 35 corridor, I know when I go through Austin now, I mean, they're building so many apartment complexes in southern Austin. I mean, that's all it is. So obviously there's a demand. And, you know, soon we will be dealing with the San Antonio-Austin Metroplex. Whether we like it or not, it's coming. And so to plan to be able to take advantage of that traffic and how people, like today's generation, choose to live, you know, easy access to the interstate, around places where they can go and shop conveniently, and still go back home and even walk to some of those places. But I think that being able to provide a picture of what that could look like would be easier to understand for a lot of the residents that are not going to take the time to read what's in the written plan. But I think that vision is what we really need. So, thank you.
Anyone else?
So just a quick kind of discussion point based off of kind of the last two comments from Commissioner Outlaw and Mayor Gutierrez. So if we did identify specific areas on the comp plan of this specific area is going to be for multifamily, if in 2 years we decide somewhere else in the city of Schertz and we get a zone change request for multifamily, but we didn't designate that specific spot, we can't approve it, right? Because we need to approve zoning changes in conformance with the comp plan. So designating specific areas on the map of this is the only place we want multifamily may not be thinking broad enough for the future zoning changes and things like that. So just
Okay, good point, except we've already amended the current comp plan 3 times. So anyway, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm going to offer one final opportunity if anyone, well, you know, having listened to some of these, if maybe something's come to mind and you'd like to comment, please do so. Who's got the microphone?
I understand their plan. My brother lives in LA, and he lives in what they call a condo, which is basically a glorified apartment, if you've ever been there, you know, multi-million-dollar apartment. But he has facilities close to him. He can go out, he can go to shopping, he can go to restaurants, he can go whatever. He can go back to his condo and then make it to the highway and work. That, I think, needs to be looked at and addressed before you start putting in these huge 5-story apartment complexes just for people to get out and try to get to 35. And I'll say again, on 3B, I live right there, and there's Eckhart, okay? And if you just put an apartment complex out without thinking about traffic, they're going to go through the residential community to get there. They're going to destroy Eckhart. So, I mean, I understand there has to be complexes, apartments, or glorified condos, but you have to have more than just condos there. You need to have places for them to go in that area that they can walk to without impacting the traffic plan. My 3 cents.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Sure, come on up. Name and address.
Thank you. Ken Tipton, 621 Secretariat Drive in Belmont Parkway, so I'm not really in any of these 4 things. The only reason I decided to speak is that I've been a lot of places in my life, and I've noticed I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which had a tremendous flooding problem for years and years and years.
Could you hold that mic?
Certainly.
There you go.
And so Chattanooga went and they developed some with the Tennessee Valley Authority, but mainly they did irrigation throughout certain parts of the city and also created a levee along, at that time, Chickamauga Creek. And that way they were able to use a lot of land that had previously been marsh or flood zones that they couldn't use before. Second thing I'd like to mention is when I was in D.C., where I was stationed there, my last duty station, Cameron Station closed down. And whoever bought Cameron Station put in, and I don't know a figure off the top of my head, but a large number of townhouses. And I don't see too many townhouses in Texas. And I'm not sure why, because it kind of straddles that line between a single-family dwelling and an apartment house. It gives you a large concentration of places for people to live without expanding a whole lot of area like a single family does. So if you could maybe consider, when you talk about multi-use family, consider townhomes. And I do notice that in New Braunfels, right off of behind the HEB there at 46 and 337, they are building townhomes now, which was the first ones I've seen in this area. So I just wanted to mention those two factors. It might be possible to drain Area 1, and you might be able to use townhomes as opposed to apartments for multi-use.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else? Okay. Commissioners, last chance. Mr. Mayor?
Council, any additional comments? Mayor Pro Tem Brown?
Somebody started to touch on it with multifamily. You need to have something there for the multifamily to thrive. It can't just be a standalone 1,000-unit out in the middle of nowhere. It's not going to work. That's where the town center concept, whatever what you're talking about in LA, you have a section, I don't know how many, how large or whatever, that has townhomes, condos, businesses, restaurants, et cetera, where you have apartments on top of commercial, okay? Commercial on the ground floor and apartments above it. That's been across the United States forever. We just, around here, just haven't gotten to that point yet where it's true high-density housing. Okay, we still want low-density, high-density housing. Okay, we don't like we don't like townhomes, don't like duplexes, we don't like anything that doesn't have a single-family lot attached to it. So it's also a matter of the communities accepting that as well. But yes, it's a combination of commercial as well as residential growth together to get that synergy to make it work right.
Councilmember Dollar.
So yeah, just touching on the multifamily, yeah, I would agree with Emily's comment there that we probably just need to have like the mixed use designation and then allow multifamily to be somewhere within a mixed use neighborhood. I think part of this conversation though is that I think some of what we're going to get is going to be incumbent upon us to do a better job of defining of what we want and holding developers to that. And I'll touch on the radioactive topic of the PDDs. That there's not a lot of agreement right now on what is acceptable for modification, to allow a PDD. And I think that there needs to be some more conversation between council as well as combined between council and P&Z to give staff broader guidelines to help them define what it is we want so we can get what we want in the future.
Any other comments? No. Turn it over to Commissioner. Oh, excuse me. Councilmember Hayward.
I think, we had some people talking about townhomes and condos. I think part of that problem, not designating those areas, because if we do that, then someone's going to say, well, this was designated and you're trying to put it over here, so it makes for confusion. The other thing is, I think, educating the public of what townhomes and duplexes are and why they're important to the area, and then understanding why apartments are good for the area. They're not, everyone seems to think that anytime an apartment complex comes into the city of Schertz, it's low income. And they automatically go to that, and trying to explain to them that unless they ask for tax credits, it's not low income. And so it's trying to change the mindset of the people that live here to know that some people are looking for that high density, and then the high density with places to shop and going that route. Because if they don't understand the process and what we're thinking and the way land use is going and the scenarios are going with the way people are changing their mindsets of owning property. In Schertz, we have a lot of ownership, but things are changing. People want to have apartments to live in because they don't want to take care of a yard. I know I can count 10 people already that I know who make 6 figures and they live in apartments because they don't want the responsibility, and they want to be able to just go, I can go wherever I want to go and I don't have to worry about what's going on at the house. It's a rental, it's an apartment, whatever happens, it's going to happen. I'll have my renter's insurance and I'm covered, because they want to work hard and then go play hard and not have to worry about stuff on the weekend. And that is one of those things. And then trying to change the mindset of people that everybody doesn't want to own. I think people should own, but everybody doesn't want to. And we just have to re-educate and talk to people about the process and what people are looking for now. Because of my age group and beyond, we were from a group that said, hey, own a home. This newer age group, and even now some seniors, they want apartments. They don't want to live in a house. They want to downsize to an apartment. That's their right. And we can't put our thought processes on other people and what they want and where they want to live. We just have to have that different type of housing to give people options if we want to continue to say Schertz is not going to get too expensive for people to be able to afford, your young families, because right now young families aren't going to be able to afford a $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 house. So we got to have options if we're trying to continue to bring in the young people who is going to be our future. That's the way we're going to have to go eventually. And I think educating people and having maybe some town halls or something to educate them on what we're doing and why it's a good thing for the city. I think that's our only way, because most people don't want these apartments or townhomes in their backyard. It's just the nature of the beast. Everyone thinks it's a bad thing, and it's not.
Councilmember Whitaker.
I just want to ask about the process. So I didn't bring my iPad. So I can't see the original land use plan. So obviously these are the changes that we're talking about. What's the, I'm not even sure who I'm addressing at this point, but whoever's going to answer. So, because I'm just listening to all the comments. To me, there's just so much going on here. And one of the things that I heard is we've got a lot of categories and we would like to simplify it. But if we simplify it, then is this entire conversation moot because we're not using the same categories? Or how's that going to affect this? And so of all the input that's been received, I don't think it's necessarily everyone saying the same thing. I thought I heard opposite, like, oh, I like this scenario 1 in this area and scenario 2 in this. And so everyone, wasn't really like everyone said the same thing. So what are we doing next as far as taking these two things? Are you guys going to go receive what has been said here and then modify again and come up with like scenario 3, this is what I heard you all say, and then present it to us again? Or what happens next?
Yeah, so that's why you hired us, to take all of this information and input that we receive. And on top of that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a survey, community survey, interactive map where people will be able to leave comments on the map about various things. So we take all of that information, and we try to simplify, we find those themes, and we'll come back with a revise of a revisement of the land use map, and then we'll come back to the CPAC again, you all again, and you'll be able to review that as well. So you'll have a lot of opportunities to look at and to tweak what we come back with before, because ultimately, City Council, the CPAC will make a recommendation to City Council for approval or whatever. And so at the end of the day, what you approve is what you're agreeing upon. So yeah, we'll go back, and we working with staff as well. We have, bi-weekly or monthly meetings that we meet with staff. And so we're working closely together with staff, and we'll go back and make tweaks and have the opportunity to comment.
So just, I'm just curious. So between scenario 1 and scenario 2, was there a theme that you kept with each one, or what? Thank you. Like, for example, in scenario 1, down in section 2, you went light commercial, light industrial in that section, but then, so it seemed like a little bit more dense population or, build up there. But then if you look at 3A, it was less build up there. So were you trying to do a trade-off where you do, I'm just trying to figure out, is it like this was a package deal and this was a package deal, or were you just kind of randomly picking the different uses on scenario 1 or 2?
No, it wasn't a package deal. So you mentioned 3A. So 3A was the thought of, hey, the quarry's going to be around for another 20, 30 years. So let's just kind of keep it ag conservation. And the other scenario, 3A, was, hey, quarry might go away. It's gone away in other places. And so how can we reimagine this area? So that was one thought behind the difference between that. Really nothing was changed. If you kind of, I'm kind of going back and forth. So if you look at the bottom along I-10, nothing has really changed in that. I think we kind of see that developing the same. The biggest difference there is providing some opportunity for higher density here in this area. So whether that's apartments or townhomes.
Yeah, I think that's one of the worst coloring because it blends in with the yellow. So I know that you've pointed that out a couple times, but I don't know if it's real obvious that you
could
did
tell
multifamily.
a better difference on these maps, and of course the screen looks different than it looks on computer. But and that was another reason too of simplifying this, because there are a lot of categories that you might typically see in a zoning map. But what we'll do, so for example, for the simplification, what we like to do in terms of residential, just keep it simple: low density, medium density, high density. So your low density, of course, that's your single family home. Your medium density can be either duplexes, townhomes, garden, apartments, things of that nature. And then the higher density would be, it could be the mixed use high density, where you have a mix of commercial retail, or it could just be your typical apartment style development.
Okay.
So we'll simplify that. And then on the industrial side, we typically light, heavy. We'll have some other designations in there as well.
Great. So the burden's on you guys? Okay. I'm good. I have no more questions.
No other questions. I got one more slide. Was it any other input on the land uses?
Yeah, I do. Regarding the conversations on apartments, I personally don't have anything against apartment complexes, but in Schertz recently, or the past 5 or 6 years when all these apartment requests have come up, for some reason they want to put the apartments adjacent to an established neighborhood that's been there for 20, 30, 40 years. I don't think anybody wants that. And especially bounded on 2 or 3 sides of a neighborhood, who would want to have a 3-story apartment in their backyard when they've been living in a house peacefully for 40 years? I wouldn't want that. So I think we have enough vacant space around the city where there could be some good places for apartments, and let the houses come later. I really don't like putting apartments up in people's backyard, and that's what's been happening lately. In regards to the quarry, I don't know what the lifespan of that quarry is, but when you look at San Antonio, they've got Six Flags is in an old quarry. The Quarry Market shopping center is in an old quarry. Morgan's Wonderland, a beautiful place, and Northeast ISD Stadium Complex is in an old quarry. I'd rather not give it up. I'd rather keep it, figure out what we can do with it, and 20, 30 years from now, we might have a jewel sitting out there that nobody can fathom right now. But San Antonio's done a good job with their old quarries. Maybe we can too.
Anyone else? All right, you had one last slide?
So again, we'll go back and we'll be revising the future land use map. I did mention that the survey will be going out, so we won't do it immediately. We want to see what input that we receive. And then we'll also have a community engagement event. We haven't identified a date yet, but it'll be either late August, early September timeframe that we do that. After we receive that input, after we have revised the map here, we'll come back to you all for the third meeting, and then we'll have some discussion at that time.
All right. Thank you very much.
And just to clarify, so this is kind of the critical stage in the process. We wanted to get greater input from council as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission. But all CPACs moving forward will be strictly Planning and Zoning Commission. They will be public hearings, however, just like this, so we invite everybody to come in and give comments, give input, including City Council. But there's 2 more meetings scheduled. They're tentatively scheduled, so August, September, and then we'll have 1 more after that. So just want to put that out there.
All right, thank you, Sam. And the folks will be around for a few minutes. If you wouldn't mind, just get with them, because we're running kind of long here. If you don't mind. Okay.
All right, Commissioner, with your permission there, I take a motion from Schertz City Council to close our portion and let you continue with your business.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, at 7:01, we're going to close City Council portion and let you guys press on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Brown. And we will close the CPAC meeting at 7:02 p.m. We'll take a short break for the, let's shoot for 7:10 for the Planning and Zoning meeting. All right, thank you all.